Hey guys, this episode deals with a game that has a lot of interpretations and a lot of detail that's easy to miss, and I missed some details here and there or misremembered. We will address that in a future episode, but for now, enjoy the episode and give us your interpretations on the game Dear Esther. So thank you very much.
Hi, I'm Safi,
And I'm Mystic.
and this is Lore Together. This is the podcast where a married couple talk about everything that deals with storytelling and setting and characters in video games because it's one of the things we like to do together. We lore together.
Yes, and this is episode 17.
Oh my gosh.
We've made it all the way to 17.
Wow. Oh,
This is also
man.
our first podcast, our first episode as parents.
Oh, we're parents.
You may hear our child in the background. We do apologize for that.
But
Since he is so wee, he is in the room with us.
he is very wee. But he's also asleep right now, so we'll see how long that lasts. Let's try to get through this as fast as possible.
So if you want to, we have a kid. If you want to help us, our financial future and his financial future, you can do that by going to patreon.com/lore together. We can get access to the episodes early. You get access to our bi-weekly streams where we play the games that we cover. You can also get access to early mini episodes there, which we just released one to the public.
Yeah. So those of you who listened to the mini episode, you got that a month later than all of our patrons. So if you want those right away, patreon.com/lore together. If you just want to keep up with us, we've got our Twitter @lore together, which is usually me when I'm not, giving birth to a child. It's been a little quiet recently, but we're going to get back at it pretty soon. We also have our email, loretogether@gmail.com, and I think that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Those of you who have been listening for a long time will remember we used to have the Reddit tag here.
Yeah.
I'm not on it nearly enough for that to be a real point of contact.
Yeah, so it's better to do the email and the Twitter. We've been a little quiet on that as we've been adjusting to the new living situation with our child, but we're going to be back at it because obviously we've kept our recording schedule, which is a very good sign.
So, all right, let's get into this. Episode 17. We're going to be talking about, again, we're doing this thing where Safi does not know what we're talking
I have
about.
no idea what we're talking about.
So we're going to be covering one of the first big, quote, walking simulators.
One of the first big walking simulators.
The ones that ruined the industry, according to some people, but I personally love them.
So how does a walking simulator ruin the industry?
There are some people who believe that a game has to have gameplay beyond just you controlling a character. There has to be either combat or puzzles or some other aspect of gameplay where you're changing the narrative beyond just you walking around.
Okay.
I like walking simulators personally because it's literally what I love to do. It's exploring and getting
Right.
story. So
And I would think a lot of mystery type games would be built in that fashion, that they would be
I
kind
think
of
back
a
in the
walking
day,
simulator.
Myst would have been considered a walking simulator to a lot of people because it was so different compared to what most games were.
Even though it's a puzzle game right
It
now.
is a puzzle game. It kind of straddles that line sometimes.
Okay.
Especially in the more recent games of its ilk, where it's like, here's a puzzle, but for most of the time you're doing backtracking and exploration.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
There are some problems with walking simulators in my mind. They tend to be very linear, which isn't a lot of fun for me.
Right. I get that.
The ones that I will cover in this series in Lore Together are not as linear.
Okay.
In the fact that there's layers to the lore. It's not just here's one story and that's it.
Right.
You can interpret things differently. They're either vague enough to be interesting or they're intricately layered enough to be interesting. It's not just meh. Also, we're never going to cover Stanley Parable because I don't want to deal with all those endings.
Which, P.S., this is advocating for Stanley Parable, which is just more just like a philosophical exercise than anything else.
There is a new version coming out.
Ooh.
They're doing one with better graphics and new endings and stuff.
Ooh.
It is being delayed until it was supposed to come out in 2019.
Right.
Then they delayed it till 2020.
And then the
Then
pandemic
everything happened
happened
in 2020. So now it's 2021.
2020, where the only thing we'll talk about 20 years from now is that what happened to you in 2020? We had a son, and that's the only thing we talk about right now.
Hey, we started this podcast.
And we started, oh, yeah, that's right. So,
We started this podcast exactly in 2020. The first episode was in January, and
Wow.
then everything went nuts.
right. 20.
Don't blame us, though.
Yeah. When it was 2020, when it was full of promise. Oh,
So,
man.
this game was originally released in 2008 as a mod for the Half-Life 2 based Source engine.
Oh,
So, it was a mod for the Half-Life 2 engine and was later released as a full game in 2012. It is written by Dan Pinchbeck and was developed by The Chinese Room.
that's a really weird name.
I'll get into the name in a second, but this
Okay.
game is Dear Esther.
Oh my gosh. This is a classic walking simulator then.
I knew The Chinese Room was kind of, when I first saw it, I was like, what's that about?
Yeah.
So I looked it up, and The Chinese Room draws its name from a thought experiment in computer AI research and development.
Oh, is that about the experiment of a computer translating, and there's like a thought experiment about whether a translator has sentience or not.
I think you are correct.
Yeah. Okay.
I think you're thinking the right thing, but let me run through the actual stuff. So the original idea was proposed by John Searle in 1980 and is basically proposes a hypothetical artificial intelligence research that has succeeded in constructing a computer that behaves as if it understands Chinese.
Okay.
It takes Chinese characters as input and, by following the instructions of a computer program, produces other Chinese characters which it presents as output.
Okay.
Suppose that this computer performs its task so convincingly it comfortably passes the Turing test. Now,
Right.
the Turing test is basically saying if somebody viewing the output thinks it's a real person, it is passed.
Ah. Okay. Yeah.
So-
Yeah.
It convinces the human Chinese speaker that the program itself is a live Chinese speaker. To all of the questions that the person asks, it makes appropriate responses such that any Chinese speaker would be convinced that they are talking to another Chinese-speaking human being.
Right.
The question Cyril wants to answer is this. Does the machine literally understand Chinese, or is it merely simulating the ability to understand Chinese through its programming?
Right.
So that's why they cut their name for The Chinese Room. This is this theoretical...
Yeah, I remember hearing about this because so I was definitely one of those overachievers in high school, and most of us overachievers at my high school took AP European history, which if you don't know the AP system, don't worry about it. It's just basically a hoity-toity way to say you're taking something similar to a college level course of information in high school. But anyway, and I was tired of learning about European history because I felt like I'd done a lot of that through American history because that's just how our history is taught in America. So instead, I took my first half of senior year, I took philosophy, and that's when I heard about that Chinese translation test.
Yep.
And then the second half was Asian studies, which was awesome in another way.
So, Dear Esther is a convoluted story at times, and there's a lot of interpretations that you can make from almost any single piece of evidence.
I love literary interpretations. This is my jam.
And, well, then you're going to have to play this game because there's no way I covered everything
Cool.
because I would be here for hours.
We don't want to take hours of your time, audience. We just want to take, maybe 45 minutes to an hour and a half.
Probably going to be closer to a half hour at this point.
Oh, okay.
Basically because there's a lot of nuance you can get, but to cover it all gets really convoluted to just listen to. It's better to either read it or play it.
Right. So essentially, this is a episode where we will probably be advocating for you to play the game.
We're going to spoil a lot, and it does kind of ruin some of the mystique of it. The graphics in this game are really good, especially for the time it came out, which was 2012. They did do a re-release later as well that added even more stuff and upped the graphics a tiny bit more.
Wow, okay.
So the graphics are really good. The voice acting is good. The music is good. The story is good. It's worth the play.
Because it's a short game, too, right?
It's a short game. I've played through it about 5 times already.
Okay.
I always find new stuff every time, which is another reason I'm saying we're not going to cover everything.
Okay.
Even looking at the wiki, there's stuff that I was like, I knew that. And then it's like the next paragraph, like, I had never seen that.
Right.
So-
Okay. Which is it's a good sign.
So, but we can start where the game starts, with the island and a lighthouse.
An island and a lighthouse. That's like the first thing you see, right?
Yes, we'll get to where you start, but let's explain where you are. We're actually not too far from the setting of Hellblade's Picked Warriors in Orkney. If you want
Whoa.
more on Hellblade, go check out episode 8. But we are currently going to be in the Outer Hebrides, which is off the west coast of Scotland, as opposed to the north coast of Scotland.
We were also in a different point of time, I would assume, since
Very
there's a
much so.
lighthouse. Yeah.
And out here in the Outer Hebrides, we find this small unnamed island. Apparently, you can see it from the mainland,
Oh.
but we have no idea which one it is, as far as I know.
Okay.
The game is almost 100% metaphor. Again, interpretations, layers and layers. And depending on which direction you walk even, different monologues come up
Okay.
to explain things differently. And the story changes slightly when you do that.
Okay.
So we're going to go through the characters really quickly here. First one is the narrator.
Okay.
He is a man in his 30s to 50s around, living in the UK somewhere.
Do we have any idea where his accent is from, or?
I have no idea about any of that.
Okay.
I am terrible with accents. So
Yeah, that's fair.
he is clearly a very articulate man who studies history, though we don't know if he had to or if it was just a passion and hobby. At this point, when we first start playing, he is sick, whether that be from depression, guilt, disease, infection, all are subject to interpretation.
We just know that he is ill, quote unquote.
Yes.
Okay.
But he is not well, and he speaks of this being his last visit to this island. He has been here before.
And is this the character we are in the shoes of at this point?
We'll get there.
Okay. All right. I got to ask the obvious questions.
Esther is a woman. She is not with the narrator at this time, nor is she present in the game. Clearly, the narrator and Esther have had some relationship, possibly were even married, but we don't know for sure.
Okay.
There is heavy implication early on that she has died in some fashion relatively recently, although relatively could be in the past 30 years.
Okay. So, like within a human
Yeah.
life, she has died. Okay.
But probably more likely recently, past 5 years or so.
Right. Exactly. Okay.
Again, there's a lot, with so much interpretation, time gets squiffy. Paul is another contemporary male living in the UK who lives in Wolverhampton, where he works in sales for a pharmaceutical company.
Sounds like such an exciting job.
Donnelly is an 18th century writer whose book on the Hebridean Islands is referenced by the narrator throughout the game. Donnelly traveled to the island to find information on a famous hermit living there.
So wait. And dare I ask now, is the hermit also now a character as well?
The hermit is, again, a little weird.
But is referenced on a regular basis,
Yes.
I'm assuming. Okay.
Unable to find the hermit, he charts the island and writes a history of its inhabitants, particularly a herder named Jakobsen. Donnelly suffers from syphilis and a laudanum addiction,
Whoa.
and the latter probably due to pain he suffers from kidney stones. This is like you get a lot of little tiny details.
Oh, P.S. As somebody who's now gone through labor, I've heard that the only pain that compares to labor in the same intensity is passing a kidney stone.
Yeah, especially if they don't break it up beforehand. That is, yeah.
That is essentially what it is. In fact, there's a couple episodes of
Both involve stretching stuff beyond where they're supposed to.
We're supposed to. No. I will argue that when you are in labor, and you're doing a regular natural labor, you're using body parts that were meant to do it.
Mm-hmm.
I do not think your urethra is meant to pass a kidney stone ever.
Mm-hmm.
So, but yeah, I just want to mention that, of course, you would be addicted to painkillers if you're constantly passing kidney stones. It makes perfect sense. And of course, because of the it's laudanum. Of course, it's
Right.
laudanum back then.
So Donnelly's syphilis makes him a very unreliable narrator.
Oh yeah,
in his book.
definitely. So he's at the point where we think that his brain's becoming Swiss cheese. Then.
Yeah, a
Okay.
fact highlighted by the editor of his book and the many different accounts he gives to Jakobsen's death.
Okay.
So this is an unreliable book that the narrator has brought on this journey.
So I'm assuming throughout this video game, the idea of, perspective and memory is definitely going to be something that comes back
Oh, very
and
much
forth.
so. memory, and specifically traumatic memory, is definitely a big part of this game.
Wow. Okay.
The Hermit, again, a character that we never meet, we just hear about. A holy man who came to the island centuries ago, but it's unclear who they were. And in fact, there's a theory that this is not a person, but a title. So if you are on the island yourself, you are the Hermit, is kind of the idea.
Which, it's funny because that's kind of like in anybody who's played Vampire the Masquerade, there's a group of vampires that are called the Circle of the Crone, and essentially it's usually pagan interpretations of religion, and they'll have different positions, to counter essentially the more Christian sect that's also in there. And one of those positions is the Hermit. And the idea of the Hermit is that it is an older, wiser vampire who it's very much the position of this person never comes to you, you come to them because you need them for whatever wisdom or powers or favors that you may ask of them. And so once they've a certain vampire, and usually of course it's somebody who's a male vampire in gender, will, once they've gone through enough of the other positions to climb up and they've proven themselves over centuries, they are now the Hermit. So
Okay.
yeah. So I'm just relating it to something else that I've dealt with before.
A title being passed down to the next person in line kind of reminds me of the Dread Pirate Roberts from The Princess Bride.
Well, in theory, if depending on how you're interpreting the game, you could have a bunch of acolytes who have more than one hermit, but it depends on what kind of pagan worship are they into, because some pagan rituals and theologies are much more combative and competitive than others. So it just depends.
Okay, so keep in mind as we continue through this that we're doing I'm going to be giving you information a little out of order.
Okay.
There's a lot of letters to Esther that you will hear the narrator say, and you get pieces of information here and there and here and there.
Hence why it's called Dear Esther, because
Right.
that's part of the story progression. Okay.
So the narrator begins his story as we are standing on a slope in front of a dilapidated lighthouse. As we explore the area, various paintings and candles can be found strewn throughout the landscape, which kind of makes a path.
And for all we know, it's candles of the mind and images of the mind. Okay.
Ever present when outside on the island, there's this blinking radio tower you can see in the distance.
Boop, boop, boop.
Yeah, it's very much like, oh, that's the tallest thing, and it's obviously a goal in the game.
Ah, okay.
Exploring the islands and continuing on through, we pass a large shipwreck with cargo strewn about. Climbing the cliffs, we eventually find a bothy, which is a small cottage, which is freely available shelter for anyone who needs it, which I thought was
okay.
kind of a cool idea. The narrator has made a temporary lodging here. We don't know how long the narrator has been here. We don't know if they are us. We don't know any of this stuff.
Right. Okay.
So, but there's definitely been somebody living here. The narrator is the only likely candidate at this point. And again, events are a little randomized each time you play. In
okay.
the fireplace, the player can find several texts, including Donnelly's book.
Oh, so you can start reading Donnelly's.
It's burned. You can't read. You can just see it there.
So you know that it exists at
Yes.
least. Okay.
Which the narrator had brought from the mainland. He had stolen it from a library back in the day.
Thief.
The book is half burnt, although not completely destroyed. In some playthroughs, the books will not be in the fireplace, but will instead be on the table.
Oh, so basically every time you start up this game, there's a little bit of variation.
Yes.
Okay.
Which is why everything is convoluted and So
Okay.
And this is our first real glimpse as to the quote unreal nature of the island and the unreliability of the narrator. He claims, each time you play, you get a different version. So sometimes he claims that he has burned the book. Sometimes he has claimed that he's tossed it out to sea. You can find it both burnt and a pile of them in a culvert washed up on the beach.
Wow.
In the same playthrough.
Wow. So maybe both have happened, or maybe, one book actually is from a different situation. And
Yeah.
okay.
We eventually reach the caves, and this is the place that the narrator claims that Donnelly never went. Either he never found them, or he never mapped them, or never descended into them. And though Donnelly's guidance wasn't useful, he is now denied even this faulty guidance that he had.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in the caves, we get this another glimpse of the unreality of the island, as stalagmites and stalactites do not line up,
Oh.
which is impossible, as you need stalactites above to make a stalactite below.
Ah, so it's almost as if the cave is not actually...
Right. I mean, we
Okay.
could say it's just artistic direction, and, I'm going to say, maybe they didn't know that. It still feels weird. So,
Considering you're talking about a game that will have enough intention to have randomized clues here and there, I don't know, to forget that stalactites and stalagmites have to be on top, basically across from each other vertically.
yeah.
That's a little weird, too. I would agree.
This is where we kind of fully shift into metaphor, though, and the caves are kind of the narrator's descent, his point of no return.
Oh.
So we should probably maybe discuss. You get events pieced together all over the place, but let's discuss in total the events that have pushed the narrator to come to this deserted island, living here in Abathi, away from the world, and reaching this point of despair.
And possibly with what you've mentioned before, becoming the hermit that has been referenced previously.
Possibly. Not too long ago. Don't know how long, but not too long ago.
Yeah.
Esther and the narrator are driving the M5, which is a highway in the UK.
Okay. Do we know, where exactly in the UK is the M5? Do you know?
Well, they're driving between Exeter and Bristol.
Oh, okay.
I apologize for any mispronunciations. I tried to do my best. Paul is behind the wheel of another car, having just finished a sales conference in Exeter and is traveling home to Wolverhampton, which is north of Bristol.
Okay.
He loses control for some reason, hitting the narrator's car somewhere between the Sanford Turnoff and Welcome Break, which is a chain of convenience stores, which puts the timeline here about after 1998.
Wow. Okay, so that's pretty recent for a lot of game production these days. Yeah.
In fact, a later version, that later version I talked about, you actually can see the crash site at one point, and there's a mile marker. So people have actually tracked this down to the M5 just past the River Avon at marker 144.4.
That is kind of cool, actually. So, I guess I say it is kind of cool that they've linked it to the real world. I love doing that.
It's not 100% accurate, but
no, it never is. Like, even with me writing, I wrote a short story that well, this, Mystic. I wrote a short story that was based in our neighborhood. Almost a year ago now. I wrote that in October for a contest, and it was even though it was based in the future, it was still in our neighborhood, and there was a lot of stuff that I'm sure some people would recognize and some people, but it would never be exact. It's just, it can't be at that point.
So why Paul lost control is kind of up for debate.
Okay.
In some passages we hear he's drunk. Later on, he's not.
So sometimes it's just nature took its course.
Why is So why is up for debate? We don't know.
So the why.
We don't know the why.
And it sounds like then narratively, what that suggests is that the why is not the important thing to focus on here.
Right.
Okay.
So Paul is in a bad condition following the accident and has to get resuscitated.
Ooh.
Esther is trapped in the car. They have to cut her out, as it looked like it was dropped from a great height, like it was that crushed.
Oh my God.
Esther dies in this, from all we can tell. And there is a lot of symbolism to back up the idea that she was also pregnant at the time.
Oh my God. Okay.
We see a sonogram on a table with a bunch of broken eggs.
Oh my God. You're going to make me tear up. Oh.
So, yeah, I didn't know about this aspect of the game until I was doing my final research for this. And it's like, oh, this is perfect for new parents to read.
Yeah, that's exactly what I needed to read. Well, I mean, luckily, it's better you were doing this now after I've given birth than, say,
That's
2 to 4 weeks ago when we would have been recording before I gave birth and you would just made me more anxious. So, but that is really sad. For me, that's... whenever a baby dies, or whenever a potential baby dies, that's a wanted baby dies, I should say. That's always that's always the worst thing, because the thing that a baby represents is this the beauty of potential of human ingenuity and spirit.
Well, the fact that there's a sonogram kind of tells you that they knew.
Yeah.
So, also, a lot of people say, oh, it's an ultrasound. A sonogram is a printed ultrasound. Like,
Yeah.
an ultrasound is a machine that will do the
Yeah,
measurement.
the sonogram
and
is
the
the
visual is a sonogram.
Yeah, the sonogram is what we have on the fridge
Yeah.
right now.
So, in fact, like this sonogram actually, so to kind of give you a visual of how this all comes up,
Yeah.
is you have this literal drop in the caves. You have this thing you drop down, you land in water, and you're at the crash site, but you're underwater.
Oh my
And
gosh.
as you're trying to swim up, like you see, like you can barely see like these flashes of the sonogram as you're trying to like swim up and everything. So it's like this
man.
weight on your on the narrator or whoever's playing.
Right.
So, yeah, it gets this game gets heady.
This is very heavy. Oh my lord.
So the narrator survives and does try to meet with Paul,
Right.
who is racked with guilt. The narrator has no hard feelings for Paul and just wants to try to like connect and get maybe some closure, maybe something.
Right, because regardless, we don't know what his relationship to Esther is, but one of the most healthy ways to deal with a tragedy of that nature is to humanize it, and one of the best ways to humanize it is to offer forgiveness to
Right.
what could be considered the person to blame.
Right. I think they are definitely in it. I think the narrator and Esther are definitely in a relationship. We
Right.
don't know if they're married or anything, but they're definitely in a relationship.
A romantic relationship, you think?
I believe so, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is there debate on that, or
It's just not clear. I don't know if there's actually a lot of debate on it.
okay?
So Paul is nervous and anxious
Right.
and guilt-stricken and all
Right.
this stuff. And eventually, he likely takes his own life before we start the game.
Again, that's a lot of speculation.
Though
on
it's
that?
a little unclear what his ultimate fate is. Literally on the Wikipedia, it says unclear or like unconfirmed or whatever. So.
Wow. So it's insinuated that because of the guilt, he takes his own life, but we're not sure.
Right. Definitely the narrator feels saddened by this, apparently.
Right.
Again, there's passages that I have never heard in this game. So, even though
Okay.
I've played it 4 or 5 times already. So, in his grief and illness, the narrator has come to an island, one that he's been to before, one that he's read about before. And while traversing the island, you can actually see ghosts. They're just like figures off in the distance, and they disappear before you get to them.
Like dark, shadowy.
They're like
figures?
shadowy human shapes, and some people have interpreted these as Esther, Paul, Donnelly, Jacobson, and the unborn child lost in a car crash.
Okay.
Again, that's an interpretation. I think it's kind of a cool idea.
But it could also just be when you're talking about figures or ghosts like that. Sometimes I think it could just be the idea and the premise of the unobtainable, the unreachable. So it doesn't have. I don't think it necessarily the number means specifically how many people he's lost,
Right.
or are lost in this journey on this island. But I do think it definitely is representing this feeling that obviously the narrator has of what he can never really what he can see but can't touch. I mean, like Donnelly, he only knows through writing. He's only got pictures of, I'm sure now he's only got pictures of Esther and like memories of Paul and all of that stuff.
Yeah. You know, this description of Esther where she had a birthmark across half her face when she was born.
Oh, wow.
And the doctors were so silent that her cries filled the silence, but then it faded before she met the narrator.
Oh, wow.
And so, like, that's kind of all we know of her physical appearance is this one thing. There's some pictures, quote unquote, that might be Esther, but they're so hard to even see because they're dilapidated or you can't get close enough to see much detail on them and stuff.
Well, this kind of speaks to, I mean, I feel like this, a lot of this feels like when we talked about Hellblade, Senua's Sacrifice, because a lot of this.
Both games do a lot with mental health.
Yeah, both of them doing a lot with mental health and dealing with trauma. And this kind of reminds me in particular that, we're talking about memory, and people think that memory is very much, like a snapshot photo or like taking a video where you get everything, accurately how it was. But memory is actually in the human brain extremely coded by emotion. And that's usually what you hang on to longer than the specific images or
Right.
events that have occurred.
There was literally a line I remember where he says that he has driven the stretch of road on the M5 like 21 times and can't remember where it is, but he can see it in his rearview mirror.
Right. Right. Because it's not about what exactly happened. It's not about the objective truth of what happened. It's about, at least in the human brain, it's the feeling. It's the feeling of knowing that, something awful has happened, that you've lost somebody very important to you, and potentially you've lost this child as well. I mean, that's what's going to, and that's why science is now finding out that, a lot of times if you've got a witness in a case, it's not always reliable because their memory is
Right.
so easily manipulated and coded or altered or changed.
Yeah, memory is not reliable. Memory is fluid,
Yes.
and memory is able to be influenced.
Right.
So-
Because memory was not made for modern man. Memory was made for when we were living day to day, from where human origins were as, nomadic hunter gatherers. And that the emotion of knowing where certain food is or where dangerous things are is much more important in those circumstances than the exactitude of when you can pick up certain fruits and
Right.
vegetables on this certain day. Like, it didn't work like that back then, and we haven't, human evolution hasn't caught up to that.
Also, your brain will constantly get rid of memories it doesn't consider worthy.
Yes.
That's why you can drive your same stretch of road every day you drive to work for 10 minutes and not remember the last 10 minutes of driving because
Right.
you've reacted, you've driven it. Your brain has just said, well, we're done with that. I'm just going to toss this because nothing happened.
Or even for some people, like you have, like I was bullied growing up, unfortunately, in elementary school. And there are some memories that other people have told me about when I was bullied that happened where I was really upset. And as a coping mechanism, my brain has let go of those memories entirely because it wasn't going to do me any good. So my brain just decided, you don't need this memory. And other people remember it for me because it was shocking to them. But for me, I'm just like, I don't even know what you're talking. I have no idea. And it's a defense mechanism. So that's how it is.
So we emerge from the caves finally, and we're in the last chapter. We're at the area where there's this blinking radio tower up on a cliff, and we slowly climb up. It's this great looking area actually because there's this like bay area with candles and stuff in the water, and there's little paper boats in the water, which are all letters to Esther, apparently. And the narrator, as he's walking through, or as he's talking to us as we're walking through, he is becoming more feverish and demented in his reasoning, shouting and illogical, and the whole climb up this bluff face until you get finally to the tower, and then you calmly climb this radio tower
Wow.
and jump.
Oh.
And just before you hit the ground, you fly off as a gull on the wind.
Oh my.
So that's the end of the game, but obviously there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, and now, especially with that ending, it's all about the metaphor. So now you kind of want to go back and dig in and figure out what is this little miniature world trying to tell you.
Right. And there's a lot of things that many people don't understand. Sometimes in some of these letters and rantings and stuff, it seems like Paul and the narrator are the same person,
Oh. Huh.
but then they're not.
Right. But that might...
Literally the line is like, I don't know where the hermit, I think it was where the hermit ends and Paul and I begin.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is the loneliness of tragedy. I mean,
Yeah.
there's a reason why people have support groups when they've suffered, a traumatic loss of any sort, not just the loss of like a person, but a loss of even like, loss of, your abilities or loss of a limb, loss of rights even. God, you have to have some sort of support system. And I think Paul and the narrator, one of the things they probably have the most in common is that loneliness, which is probably why the narrator wanted to reach out to Paul in the first place. And they both probably are also additionally lonely because of the guilt that they're suffering.
Yeah.
Because as much as, it's suggested that it's Paul's car that veered into the narrator's car, at the same time, if you still were driving the car, you still feel like you must have had some sort of control over that situation.
Right.
It's this false sense of, I don't even know. It's a false sense of,
what could I have done to do this better? Stuff like that.
Yeah. It's, you take on this responsibility that you should never have taken on because you felt like, well,
survivor's guilt.
Yeah. Survivor's guilt. And survivor's guilt is more than just, survivor's guilt can happen whether or not you have control, but there's something about having a steering wheel in your hand and having something horrible happen to you anyway that makes you feel guilty. I mean, I've only been in fender benders, but when I've been in a fender bender that wasn't my fault, I still felt guilty that I had that car in my control.
Right. When you play, you'll probably see this if you get to the caves, but there's glowing blue paint everywhere.
Ooh,
just all over the place. And they a lot of them are marking out chemical compounds and electronic diagrams and stuff. Which I think is just the narrator's mind working through things, because Paul was a guy who worked in chemical stuff, and all the electronics seem to be car related.
Oh, exactly. The mix of the two.
But it's still really striking and weird. You're like, what is going on?
It's almost kind of like his brain's trying to figure out what fated them to have this accident.
Right. And there's this repeating number 21, which some people have said, oh, that's because alcohol was involved in 21 as the drinking age. But it takes place in the UK, which it's not 21 there.
No, it's 18. It's 17 or 18. I think it's 18.
It's still not 21.
Yeah, it's definitely younger. Yeah, it's definitely younger.
I think people read too much into some of these small details sometimes.
The only thing I would think of is 21, but I don't think it's 21. I think it's 23 because this was something my brother picked up when he was in high school. There was some guy who would weigh people before and after they died because he was trying to figure out the weight of the soul.
Yes, that was someone else's theory, that it was the weight of the soul.
Yeah, which
is,
I thought was 23 grams.
I don't know. I did hear that one. I don't ascribe to that theory to begin with, so.
Well, yeah,
But I get the symbolism there. There is a lot. Speaking of soul and stuff, there is a lot of religious symbolism that's used.
Okay. Is it
a lot of Bible quotes are used.
Okay.
But it seems to be just to be used as analogies and similes. Mm-hmm. And they get more and more frequent as he gets more and more into his delirium. I feel like you start seeing it painted on cliff sides and stuff.
So it sounds like it's used as a way to rationalize his actions.
Right.
Okay.
Again, going back to we're not even sure if Paul was drunk or not. We have no idea what caused the crash.
Yeah, you've got the gull, you've got the booze,
right.
you've got possibly just bad luck.
And the most interesting one of all of this is we're not even sure who we're playing as.
Right.
Are we playing as the narrator? I've seen a theory that we are playing as Esther's soul, letting go as the narrator finds some peace or closure, or is cured of his disease and pain. And this theory has a little bit of evidence to back it up. If you as the player, not knowing who we're playing as, falls off of a cliff or swims out in the ocean, we hear the narrator say, come back. And we respawn back in safety. It's like, come back to me, that type of stuff. So it's just like so many different theories you can have on everything. There's also a theory that we're playing as someone else entirely, never mentioned the story. The one that the narrator at one point calls the one who will come after me.
Right.
But is that, is the island a real place? And the interpretation seems to be a lot yes and no.
Right. Well, I mean, a state of being is still a real place when you think about it. Let's if we really want to get there, if we want to have this be one of the headiest, trippiest episodes we have, that is definitely something that's true. A state of being is definitely
it. There's a comedy podcast you and I listen to once in a while, and one of the guys, his character is kind of an idiot, and they're like, name a state, name any state, and he goes Chicago, And the guy goes, I would have accepted depression.
Yeah,
That is,
that's fair.
That is citation needed, if you guys are wondering. It's a pretty decent podcast.
Yeah, they're hilarious.
So again, we can go back to who is the hermit.
Right.
Was he a single person, or were Jacobson, Donnelly, and the narrator also the hermit?
I mean, I think so. It just, to me, when you're talking to me about this, and this is somebody who hasn't played the game and is just listening to Mystic giving me all the information that he can, it sounds like the island. It's not important who it is. It's more important the state of being that you're in there.
Right.
And it sounds like it's a lot of it sounds like it's about grief, the loneliness of grief, the attempt to reach out to things that you can't not touch, and what you're grieving is no longer within reach. The inability to rationalize why the source of the grief ever occurred. That seems to be a lot of what we're dealing with in this game.
Here's one that is kind of interesting. An interesting question I saw asked is, who are the gulls flying beside us?
Right.
And here, because the narrator during this final cutscene, sometimes, because of course the dialogue is a little random, will call them Esther Donnelly and Paul Jacobson.
Oh.
But again, at this point, he is also extremely unreliable.
Right.
And I saw one theory that the gulls flying beside are Esther and the unborn child, which is certainly a nice emotional bow on it, at least.
Yeah, exactly.
But again, it's just everything in this game is open to interpretation. Every time I've played it, I've seen something new.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing is, the only thing that makes grief bearable is not being alone in the middle of it. Like, just thinking about recently, the people we've lost and grieved, which we don't talk about here because we're here to have fun, guys. We're not here to talk about...
We're here to have fun with this super depressing look into mental health and death and suicide. And
yeah. Really, really hope you guys are in a good mood when you're listening to this. I'd hate to put somebody in a downward spiral over a podcast. Anyway.
To be fair, most of the best art and drama and stuff is going to have dark parts.
Dark parts, definitely. When we've been through grief, I think for us recently, so recently, if you don't mind me sharing, Mystic, you lost your grandmother, literally months before we had our son. You lost your grandmother. I think about, one of the first things we had to do in our relationship, like a year after we started dating and I was finally in town and was no longer long distance relationship, you lost your grandfather of that set of grandparents.
Yes.
You helped me with the loss of my grandmother, which hit me particularly hard. And I think the thing that made it bearable for us to deal with that stuff, at different levels because we were different closeness to those relatives, was that we weren't alone. I mean, and not just you and me.
Family and friends are supposed to be there for.
Yeah. So. It wasn't just you and me because obviously we always have each other, but it was more like the family who knew the experiences we had with those relatives. We could lean on each other and remember good memories and talk about, what made it important and special. And the only time we've ever really, to be honest, the only time that anybody during those grieving moments that we've then proceeded to cut ties with anyone was anybody who decided that grieving process was not a group process. Anybody who basically decided they're going to remove themselves because of some usually petty reason, that's when, for both of our families, we've kind of cut those people out because they don't understand that that's part of the healing process is doing this together.
This begs the question then for this is another question is, does the narrator have any extended family beyond Esther and this child?
Why are these figures the figures that the narrator clings on to the most?
I can understand the guilt and the grief.
Yeah. Okay. We can continue this, but you might hear our son.
Yeah, we had to take a slight detour with our kid needs to be held.
Yeah.
So,
he just wants to be held. He usually does this time of night, so it's fine. So you might hear him sucking on his pacifier. And
we don't know what the support structure is for.
Yeah, were they
the narrator.
Were they alone? Were these the only people in their life? And that might beg the question of, or might help answer the question: why did he reach out to Paul? He reached out to Paul because, there might have been a situation why, he and Esther were pretty much alone.
Right. We don't know.
We have no idea.
And, I'm sure there's things I've missed in this write-up. There's always something new to uncover, it seems, in this game. I think it's safe to say we may never have full concrete ideas of the lore in this game.
And that sounds like this is one of those times where it feels like that is very expressly the point. Like, this is a
Right.
little less frustrating to me than it was to hear about that in Half-Life. Because in Half-Life, it sounds like they're just doing it for the convenience of whatever serves whatever game they want to make at the time.
Right.
Whereas Dear Esther is very much about a player's personal experience exploring the motifs and the themes within this walking simulator.
This is a little bit more artistic than a Half-Life would be. Because you're stripping away so much of the quote gameplay and focusing so much more on environment and story than you are on anything else. Like that's all there is environment and story.
Right.
You can't even jump or run in the game.
So you're just always at a walking pace.
So, but I think that's what we're going to call it for now because
of this guy.
Well, because of him and because we're never going to cover everything.
Yeah. So basically play the game. And
definitely worth a playthrough. Go in knowing that it's not a typical game. Go in expecting it to not have jumping and puzzles and everything. Go in expecting just to have a decent story given to you and really, really nice environmental work.
Think of it as like reading something like A Catcher in the Rye or another kind of like classic literature masterpiece where when you go and you dive into the book, there's so many different themes and ideas that you can pick up.
But I think we're going to wrap it there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And thank you for all for listening.
Yes. Oh my gosh.
If you want to support us, you can do that through Patreon at patreon.com/loretogether.
Yeah.
You can get access to episodes and stuff early. You heard the spiel at the beginning. Let's not go through that again. You can also contact us directly through Gmail at loretogether@gmail.com and on Twitter at loretogether.
Yes. We love hearing from you guys. We love seeing what you guys respond to. I know that one of you guys really loved hearing our exploration of the other Mist Worlds episode and is
Mist
hoping,
Ages, yeah.
Yeah. And hoping that, there's all this talk about the TV show and that the TV show is going to hopefully explore some of these, which I think would be a fantastic idea, especially now modern technology can do a lot more with those sets than they could, back when it first came out. So,
but we have a kiddo who's slowly waking up, so we're going to head off.
But he's falling back asleep in my arms. I don't know.
Either way, makes recording difficult.
Yeah.
So
okay.
Thank you guys for listening.
Thank you so much. We love doing this show, and we love knowing that you guys love hearing it. So, yay.
Bye.
Bye.